The gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox.
Mr. Speaker, a point of personal privilege.
Gentleman may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, we're at the halfway mark of the session. Over the last 30 days, the issue of Obamacare's Medicaid expansion has dominated the headlines. Last week, several colleagues from down the hall unveiled a Medicaid expansion proposal, though they tried very hard to call it anything but Medicaid expansion. I have noticed that for the past several weeks, my friends on the other side of the aisle, as well as the governor, have done everything they could to avoid using the term Medicaid expansion. The minority leader has talked about closing the coverage gap. The governor's talked about extending access to health care coverage. It's important that we be candid. And if we are being candid, the Senate proposal is Medicaid expansion. They put a new name on it. They are trying to sell it differently, but it's still Medicaid expansion. What we're really talking about is Medicaid expansion under Obamacare. That is the issue we're dealing with this session. Frankly, I think trying to call it anything else is nothing short of Washington-style political sleight of hand. When I spoke 2 weeks ago, I made an analogy that I think applies very well to Obamacare's Medicaid expansion. I said the debate over Medicaid expansion reminds me of the scene from the Charlie Brown cartoon with Lucy and the football. Lucy puts the football down, and every time Charlie Brown falls for it. Regardless of what you call it or how you explain it, it's still the same story. We still know what's going to happen in the end. There are a number of issues with the Senate Medicaid expansion proposal, which is a lot like the Arkansas model of Medicaid expansion. The most obvious one is, what is Virginia going to do when the federal money goes away? What are we going to do when Lucy pulls up that football? The answer is that we're going to get stuck with the bill. Virginia taxpayers are going to pay for it. The idea that somehow Virginia can back out of Medicaid expansion is a pipe dream. It is like a bad warranty from a used car salesman. In Arkansas, unfortunately for them, is learning the hard way that dealing with the federal government is never easy. Bruce Westerman is a majority leader in the Arkansas House of Representatives. He's one of the original authors of the Arkansas model, but today he's opposed to the Arkansas plan. And he recently offered these words of caution to other states. The first thing you have to remember, he says, is that there's no free money from CMS, and they will not give you the authority that you truly think you're going to get. Arkansas's waiver request to CMS included an opt-out provision just like the one the Senate proposal touts. But when CMS came back to Arkansas, according to the majority leader, the opt-out provision had two conditions. First, Arkansas had to provide a minimum of 7 months notification to phase out the plan. Before they could even phase out the plan, they had to give 7 months notification. Second, each and every beneficiary has the right of appeal to have their benefits continued, and their benefits are guaranteed during the appeal process. To me, that does not sound a lot like flexibility. It doesn't seem like Virginia is getting to keep control. That brings me, Mr. Speaker, to my second concern. Is Obamacare the model that we want to follow? I'm sure you all remember that Nancy Pelosi said famously, "We have to pass the bill to find out what's in it." And I'm sure you remember that the Affordable Care Act was passed in the middle of the night. Obamacare was rushed through in the middle of the night because its political supporters were so desperate to make something happen, they did not care about the consequences. And now, almost 4 years later, we're seeing the results of that work. The website barely works, premiums are skyrocketing, and thousands of Virginians, including 2 in this chamber, have had their health care plans canceled. Last week, the CBO said Obamacare will result in 2.3 million fewer full-time workers. And yesterday, the Obama administration delayed the employer mandate for mid-sized businesses until 2016. They're rewriting this law on a daily basis. Trying to cobble together a plan for just the sake of doing something is never a good idea. Obamacare is proof of that. Is that how we want Virginia to approach the Medicaid expansion? Do we really want to rush the process? Mr. Speaker, that brings me to my final point, I think the one that's really crucial if we face the second half of the session. Virginia is very fortunate to have a well-established budget process. we are known around the country for our responsible fiscal management. Last year, we were at a deadlock on the budget over this very same issue. The issue of Medicaid expansion threatened to derail everything we want to do last session. That's K-12, that's higher ed, et cetera. But working together, the House and the Senate conference committees came up with a solution, a way to deal with Medicaid expansion outside of the budget process. And I repeat, outside of the budget process. We created the Medicaid Innovation and Reform Commission to identify, implement, and measure a series of reforms to help bend the cost curve, improve the quality of care, and address the long-term challenges facing Medicaid. The General Assembly agreed that reform should come first and that Merck should have the final say-so on what those reforms have been implemented and what this plan does. Mr. Speaker, this threatens once again to put our budget in jeopardy. I think that is extremely dangerous. We have a process that both houses and both parties agreed to last year, and everyone who tries to use the budget as a vehicle to circumvent the process is directly responsible for whatever the consequences could be. I've heard a lot of talk about the Virginia way in the last few weeks. In my opinion, the Virginia way means taking a long view and exercising great caution. The plan we saw yesterday from the Senate does neither. The path forward for Virginia is clear. We need to let the Merck continue its work. We need to give Merck the comprehensive audit of Medicaid they have asked for, and we need to look very carefully at the long-term cost of any proposed Medicaid expansion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.